Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 8th and final installment of our Global Perspectives Speaker Series for the spring of 2021. My name is Mark Wynn. I'm a Vice President in the International Group here at the Dallas Fed and Director of the bank's Globalization Institute, which hosts these events in collaboration with our Communications and Outreach Department. Our guest this evening is Ursula Burns, who served as Chairman of the Board of Xerox Corporation from 2010 to 2017. She joined Xerox as an intern in 1980, and during her career with the company, she held various leadership posts spanning corporate services, manufacturing, and product development. She was named president in 2007 and became CEO in 2009. During her tenure as chief executive officer, she helped the company transform from a global leader in document technology to the world's most diversified business services company serving enterprises and governments of all sizes. Shortly after being named CEO in 2009, she spearheaded the largest acquisition in Xerox history, the $6.4 billion purchase of Affiliated Computer Services. In 2016, she led Xerox through a successful separation into two independent publicly traded companies. Xerox Corporation, which is comprised of the company's document technology and document outsourcing businesses, and Conduent Incorporated, a business process services company. Ursula, who regularly appears on Fortune's and Forbes lists of the world's most powerful women, is a member of the boards of ExxonMobil, Nestle, and Uber. US President Barack Obama appointed her to help lead the White House National Program on Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math from 2009 to 2016. And she served as chair of the President's Export Council from 2015 to 2016 after service as vice chair from 2010 to 2015. She also provides leadership counsel to several other community, educational, and nonprofit organizations, including the Ford Foundation, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Corporation, Cornell Tech Board of Overseers, New York City Ballet, and the Mayo Clinic, among others. She's a member of the National Academy of Engineering, the Royal Academy of Engineering, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She holds a master's degree in mechanical engineering from Columbia University and a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Polytechnic Institute of NYU. This evening, she will participate in a moderated conversation with Rob Kaplan, who is the current president and CEO of the Dallas Fed. He was previously the Martin Marshall Professor of Management Practice and a senior associate dean at Harvard Business School. Prior to joining Harvard in 2006, Kaplan was vice chairman of the Goldman Sachs Group. He's the author of several books on leadership and management. He also serves as co-chairman of Project ALS and co-chairman of the Draper Richard Kaplan's Foundation, a global venture philanthropy firm that invests in developing nonprofit enterprises dedicated to addressing social issues. About 30 minutes into our event this evening, we will be taking audience questions. If you'd like to ask the speakers a live question, please click the raise hand icon on the Zoom control bar to enter the queue. If you'd prefer to submit a written question, use the Q&A button on the same bar to submit a question to the queue. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible and also try to address questions in the order in which they are received. We apologize in advance if we did not get to your question. With that, I will turn the floor over to Rob.
All right. Thank you, Mark. And thank you, everyone, for joining in. And Ursula, it's a great honor to have you here. I first met Ursula as she was coming and I was going on the board of the Ford Foundation. And I think Ursula attended my going away reception and dinner. And so we've been following your career for years. And it's a great honor to have you here. And so I'm going to jump right in. We're going to talk a little bit about your life, and then we're going to talk about some contemporary issues. Let's just start. You're a mechanical engineer. What prompted you to go and start your career at Xerox? I think you're on mute.
I'm sorry.
No, there you're good. You're good.
Yeah, I got it. I would call myself the accidental everything. I was the accidental engineer for sure, and definitely the accidental business executive. I started my interest in engineering without knowing what the heck engineering was. I was a high school student in New York City, all-girl Catholic high school, went to Cathedral High School here on 56th Street and First Avenue. I was the first class into that building. It was just an amazing thing. Traditional Catholic all-girl education, order, discipline, writing, reading, arithmetic. That's where you focus. I turned out to be very good at math by the standards of my high school, but by the competitive open world, I was literally an average to below average student. We just didn't have a lot of advanced classes, but I had a really good education at Cathedral in studying, in writing, in reading for comprehension, and working really hard. When I was a senior in high school, went to a guidance counselor who was a nun. Her name was Sister Rosemary Thomas. And she told me that you have, really good scores here, and you can do one of three things. You can be a nun, you could be a nurse, or you could be a teacher. By the way, in her vernacular and her emphasis to me, these were great choices. Like this is like, oh my God, you're so successful. You can be one of these three things. By the way, they are not bad choices. The nun was not going to be operational in any, but the teacher and the nurse, that's not a bad thing. And my mother was poor. We grew up in a really poor neighborhood. And I realized that for both of those things, the education, the salary levels would not have been able to do anything to advance our family. So I went to the library and looked in this thing called the Barron's book. Remember that a long time ago, the Barron's book?
I do.
Where you go and it tells you the most competitive colleges, what's the average salary, starting salary after 4 years of college for certain degrees. And the average starting salary, the highest when I graduated, which was 1976, was civil engineering.
Yeah.
If you got a 4-year degree in civil engineering, chemical engineering. If you got a 4-year degree in chemical engineering, you make more money than a 4-year degree in anything else. I said, that's it. I'm going to become a chemical engineer. So that's how I became an engineer. I literally didn't know a damn thing about what engineers did, didn't know a lot about chemistry, and damn sure didn't know what a chemical engineer did. So the combination.
Okay.
And I applied to all these colleges, and by the grace of a lot of government programs, by the grace of individuals who supported other individuals, scholarships, etc., I got into a lot of schools, but I chose to go to Brooklyn Poly, which was literally within walking distance, even though it was a long distance over the bridge to my house. My mother was poor. My mother was older. She was not older, but she seemed older, and she needed help. So I wanted to be close to home. Anyway, long story short, went to Brooklyn Poly, switched from chemical engineering. I hated chemistry, to mechanical engineering. Finished that, did really well after one semester. I was in the pits in the first semester, but really good after because I knew how to study. I knew how to work hard. I knew how to kind of formulate. And then I was going to leave and go to work, and Xerox told me, don't go to work. Xerox said, don't come to work. I had worked for them in the summers. They said, don't work for me. You need a master's degree, and we'll pay. We'll get you. I got a fellowship from an organization called GEM. And it was, you work for them and you go to school at, same time. It was just amazing. So I literally did my master's degree in 18 months, left and went to work for Xerox. And the rest, as they say, is history. I stayed at Xerox for 38 years.
And so, as Mark said, in 2009, you became CEO, but you had the distinction of being the first Black woman to be CEO of a Fortune 500 company, which is, it's hard to believe that it took that long, but let me ask you, can you talk about some of the hurdles that you had to overcome to achieve this and once you were in this role?
Yeah, Rob, the thing about this is that I've had to think a lot about this because I have to try to figure out a way to articulate it.
Right.
So I would say, hurdles, we just worked hard, and there were some guys here who didn't like it, some women here didn't like. There's some investors who didn't like it. I think it's more subtle. The hurdles are not, they're not like these, okay, here is one, jump over that one, and then you can get into the next playing field and another. The way I describe it best is that the system of corporations, the system of governance of corporations, the systems of education, financial institutions are all tuned and perfected for white men. And the farther you go away from that, the more complicated it becomes. Sometimes it's so complicated that people would literally arrest you or kill you or whatever. Most of the time, thank goodness. It's not that straightforward. Most of the time, it's just not easy. It's a consistent, I say this, you have to contort yourself to fit into the normalcies that you guys sit in. You know, I walk into a room, literally one of the things I used to my advantage in the early part of my career, I walked into a room and every single person knew I was there.
Yeah.
Because you walk into a room of 50 people, 150 people, literally at Xerox, when I walk into the room, the management team meetings, there could be 500 people in the room and there would be one of me. So if I raised my hand, people would say, yeah, you know, we should probably call on that Black girl in the middle of the room. That's a good thing, but it's also, just imagine the crushing amount of complexity that you have if you don't have the ability to raise your hand, or if you just are trying every day just to kind of get by, it's hard. So there's no event, there was never an event at Xerox that had to do with race that I felt compromised on, ever, outwardly. I got a lot of events that have to do with age. By the way, I got a lot of pressure on age.
Yeah.
You're too young for this. How dare you? You didn't do this. What the hell jobs did you have? But race, people are smarter about it. There's a lot more, suave about it. But it is just a consistent and continuous, I kind of don't fit here.
Can I ask, was there a particular coach or role model that helped you at various key parts in your career?
I've had so many quote unquote particular coaches and role models. I don't know how fortunate, how I got so fortunate, right? In the beginning, a lot of my coaches and role models were peers.
Yeah.
I remember when I was working, before I graduated from graduate school, I went to work for Xerox. I was working at GE, Western Electric Engineering Research Center, Bell Labs.
Yeah.
There was a guy named Roland Harris, just a regular engineer, Black guy in the lab. He was a BS in engineering. He was a middle-aged man. He had a slide rule and just an amazingly welcoming and kind of comforting demeanor. And he was the first guy that I saw that kind of looked like me. He was a male, but who was just confident and not complicated. So he spent a while, 2 summers I worked there, and he just helped me every step of the way to understand this is how you do it. And not just how you do it only, but it's kind of like you belong here.
Right.
As I got older, I was blessed with some of the best. One of the best was Vernon Jordan. He was my friend. He was my father.
Wow.
He was my brother, my uncle. He was a board member. This guy, literally, from the time he met me in 1992 till the time he died in 2020, he took care of me.
And he sat on the board of Xerox and coached you as a board member.
Yeah, for 35 years. He met me when I was the assistant to the chairman and CEO. I saw him in the hall, and the assistant to the chairman and CEO was a great job, but this is kind of like getting presentations together, kind of, I call it the chief cook and bottle washer kind of person. It's a training position. It was really good. I did it for 2 years for Paul Allaire. And Vernon met me. And I remember walking down the hall, he called out, "Miss Burns," in his very deep voice. I turned around and looked at this guy who I know about because he was pretty famous at this point.
Yeah.
Not inside of Xerox, but famous in the world because he had been shot. My mother knew about him. He was a civil rights leader. He was on the cover of Time magazine or one of these magazines. And I said, "Me?" And he said, "Yeah, you." And I came back and he said, "My name is Vernon Jordan. How come you haven't come over to meet me?" And that started a relationship. That day, he went home and he sent me a typewritten note with his signature on it and 3 books to read. And one of them was Song of Solomon. So he cared for me above and beyond my progression as a career person. He cared for me through my whole career, my whole life, my kids born, my marriage to my husband, everything. He was just amazing. Another one was my husband. I had a lot of people.
And so if Vernon Jordan hadn't been there, things might have been different.
For sure. At his funeral, at his memorial service, we had a whole bunch of people speak, and there were 3 of us who had the same exact message. One was Kim Coopersmith, the head of Lazard. No, the head of Aiken Gump.
Yeah.
The other one was Mark Mariel, the head of the Urban League.
Yeah.
Ken Chenault, the head of American Express, and me. And you
Wow.
could have literally, and basically, we all said the same exact thing. This guy, from nowhere, for no reason, it seems like, just said, I'm in your corner and I'm
Wow.
going to help you. I'm going to move you along. Kim Coopersmith is the head of Aiken. Ken Chenault, the head of American Express.
Right.
Me, the head, because this guy actively was on the board and actively engaged in leadership and leadership transitions. That's one of the things that I'm really focused on now with the Board Diversity Action Alliance. Without a voice on the board, difference gets overlooked and often shoved into a corner. You need to have someone who could, and that's one of the things that Vernon taught me that like you would not believe.
So let's talk about that. Let's pick that up. For boards of directors, you've written a lot. You've been interviewed. You and I have talked before this. Should there be quotas on the boards for diverse people? Should there not be? What have we learned? What advice do you give to public company boards or boards generally about diversity?
Yeah, I'm going to get to let me take the elephant off the table quickly. Quotas. I have actually done, I call it a maturing of thinking, or I changed my mind,
Right.
Which is something that most politicians would never say that they did, but I think most human beings, hopefully they do.
I hope so.
Change your mind. I hope so, if you learn something. I've done a lot of adjusting in my thinking. And here was my original thinking. Quotas are not necessary. Literally, two things come together that negates a quota. One is reasonable understanding by the business that diversity is good for the business. One, right thing to do. Three, and just like fundamentally not a fight worth fighting against. So
right.
One side, diversity. The second side is that you're not going to be competitive. It just is not a reasonable place to be, right? So I said, we don't need government quotas to tell business leaders who are smart, who know how to generate, who can land literally an airplane on a dime when it comes to earnings in a quarter. They can say, I'm going to get 13 cents, and they get 13 cents.
Yeah.
They can perfect the business model like you would not believe. Do a strategy on their head. They can stave off competition. They can grow business. There is absolutely no need for a government agency or any government anywhere to tell them what to do. So there is no need for quotas. Well, here's where I am now. Quotas are the punishment for your inability to do it yourself. We literally, it's been years and years and years. I was in companies for 40 years. And we were talking about this 45 years ago. And still we haven't made enough, by the way, almost any progress when it comes to Black and brown people. We're just, because of quotas, making progress when it comes to women in the C-suite and directors.
Right.
So I now switched my approach to, I think quotas are fine, because we've tried for a long time to say, please do it. Right. Don't you get it? Here's the data, here's the facts, do it. It's a good thing to do. We've heard people say, yes, it's a good thing to do. And still the results are below poor. They're below poor. And we just did a study that is really interesting. It's going to come out really soon. I don't want to jump the gun on it too much, because we did a piece of work on public companies, company board diversity, and it's horrible. It's just horrible.
Yeah.
And you can see the data. The good news about public companies is you can generally see it.
Right.
Look at VC and PE firm data.
Right.
Whoa.
Bad. Yeah.
It's not even bad.
Yeah.
It's almost like, what I say is, you could not have planned a worse, you couldn't have planned for it to be so bad in a perfect world. It is horrible. No C-suite, literally no representation from a diversity standpoint of Black and brown. So Black and Latinx, get it. Women fare a little bit better, but
Yeah.
they're like just kind of a little bit better because the other guys are so much worse. So there is still so much work to do. And so I'm sorry for the long answer, but quotas are only for me a response to frustration. Frustration for lack of progress. That's all it is.
But you're starting to think maybe it would be a guiding post that would be useful.
It has turned out to be so in the UK and European Union.
Yeah.
When the European Union said, you got to have some women on board, guess what happened?
That.
Right? And the
and they've been very pleased, with the experience.
Same thing in California. We're starting to see it. So it's not like the people don't exist. It's not like when they come on board, there's any fact pattern, any data anywhere that says your business performs worse. So why don't we just get on it?
So let me go to an adjacent issue, which is related, obviously, and which is, as a CEO, advice. And I know you've also written a lot about this, advice to business leaders, not only on diversity, but on inclusion, on why it's smart to have a more diverse and inclusive workforce and leadership team.
And I'll get away from the what I call the moral imperative.
Mm-hmm.
I learned that not a lot of people are generally swayed by the moral imperative, even though I am. And one of the things I loved about you, and not to blow too much smoke in your face, is that you are interested in the moral imperative, because there is such a thing that we have to worry about. The math just doesn't work if we don't. The math for businesses doesn't work. It's pretty straightforward. White men are a shrinking percentage of the population.
Right.
And it's just going to take a while before they just become they're aging, and even their birth rates are not, it's well below. It's just a math problem for the longer term. The math problem is there's not enough for you guys to you can't keep replacing yourself. There's not enough space. There's not enough of you. That's one. The second is that every study done everywhere, every study, Rob, everyone shows that there's not one that shows that diverse teams perform worse than non-diverse teams. Diverse teams have better outcomes, have more flexible and future-ready, future-proof outcomes. So you're literally you're taking facts and data, which is what we do all of our studying on, all of our benchmarking, everything on, and saying, I'm going to be different. So the second thing is that the teams work better. One is a math problem. Second is the teams work better. The third is that the way of the world has changed enough that it's hard to hide anymore. It's hard to hide. So if you're an all white male team and you're selling to a global diverse economy, consumers, it used to be that it was a time nobody knew what the heck you guys look like, what we look. Nowadays, you can't hide. And the people, definitely consumers, particularly the younger consumers, are unbelievably aware and attuned to the fact that you have to actually practice what you preach. If you tell me that you're interested in diversity and inclusion, but you have no diversity and inclusion, I can just look it up and find out. So there's no more places to hide. I just think these three things, you can't pretend anymore. And at the end of it all, my mother would always said this, God, whoever that is, doesn't have to be Christian, God, whatever, does not like ugly. It's a very interesting statement that she would say to me in a way that you're expected to do what's right.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I know that this is not a popular way to have a conversation anymore, but when I was growing up, it was the way we had conversations.
Right.
It's just not right. You can't exclude just because you have it, and it's just not right. God doesn't like ugly. Please be fair, be reasonable, be inclusive, be diverse, and it's good for your business. The math doesn't work if you're focusing only on women, on white men, et cetera, et cetera.
All right. So let me ask you about another contemporary issue. You're on the board of ExxonMobil.
I am.
Okay, it's okay. And it's interesting because I'm coming to you from Texas, as you know, and we work very close. We have a big energy team at the Dallas Fed. We follow the industry. I would note, and I've explained to people, And Exxon is one of those companies that is actively spending money on sequestration, limiting greenhouse gas emissions, and investing in alternatives, and has said publicly would limit its fossil fuel production, unlike Chevron, for example, which is, but a small hedge fund, for those who don't know, that maybe owned a small amount of stock.
0.2% or something.
Yeah, was able to get a couple of board seats. And I know your board had several meetings. I guess, what did you learn from this experience? And sitting on the board of Exxon, what are your views? We made a big, I'll just say one, we made a big point here at the Dallas Fed, as fast as we can do a transition to alternatives, wind, solar, we're going to be relying on fossil fuels, we think, in the world, not for years, but for decades. And the trick will be, you need a healthy fossil fuel industry while you're making this transition. But what have you learned from this experience, and what are your observations on this?
The first thing I would say is that I don't know if you're looking for a board seat, but we need you next time. So the reason why I say it,
I'm lucky to have my current job. Yeah.
To be a speaker is that, ExxonMobil is a dichotomy for me, right? Because if you look at my history, if you look at my, where I align myself, it would be the most illogical place for me to be on a board. But I thought it was really important that I be on the board, because this conversation can't be left to emotion,
right,
and lack of facts. There, you said it, no matter what you think, we're going to need a transition from carbon-based fuels to alternative energy sources. It's going to take a while. It's going to require oil companies, Chevron, ExxonMobil, the Gulf to engage, because we have a society, not just the United States, but the world, that its health, its food sources, its potable water, its transportation, its communication is totally dependent on this thing that everybody hates. So one of the reasons to be engaged that I thought was, we actually have to start to figure out a way to do this balance, to play it both, right? You got to take from here while you invest. The science does not, the fact, you can't do what everybody wants us to do. Try to get from across the ocean in a plane without some carbon-based fuel. It's going to be kind of hard for you to do that. You're going to be rowing for a long, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So that's the reason in the back behind the reason for the engagement, and behind it, the important thing, the very important thing is that most of the board thinks that way as well. So this is not about, oh, just we're going to hold on to our molecules, nothing like that. So how does it happen? This is, I'm going to say, this is speaking a little bit out. This is called a tidal wave, and a tidal wave added to tone deafness, added to emotion, and put those three things together, and it has nothing to do with whatever the activist who owns only less than 1% of the shares of the company. The timing was perfect. The world, US for sure, shareholders for sure, are tired of hearing, just give us some time. Just give us some time. We'll clean up the air later. Just give us some time. Just give us some time. They wanted a direct, in some cases and in some ways, impossible message to be given to them that we have it all figured out. The articulation of where the industry is and where the consumers and voters want us to be has not been well done. It has not been well done by ExxonMobil for sure, and that's one of the things that we have to work on. How do we tell the story? We are one of the biggest investors in carbon sequestration. You have to be involved with us, because we're going to help to bring in the future while we keep ourselves active in the present, right? But I think it's literally, we didn't pay attention early enough vocally. There is a tidal wave of frustration around warming, around pollution, around everything. There's a tidal wave around ESG. And we happen to be at the perfect point, at the perfect place. I know that the company is strong enough to be successful as we go on, as we go forward. I think it is something that most learning things, people or organizations, adjust and move forward. And I think that we will do just that and be a better company for it.
All right, good. Let's go shift gears. Mark Wynn, let's take some questions from the audience.
Okay, I think we have one live question here from Marnie Glazer. Marnie, if you go ahead and unmute, you can ask your question.
I think that was a mistake.
Ah, okay.
Okay.
Good to hear your voice.
Next, Andrea Bellucci. Andrea, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Hi, Ursula. Thanks for being here this evening with us. Really appreciate it. I have to admit, I smiled when you said you attended Brooklyn Polytech. My father actually graduated from there with a bachelor's and master's from engineering. So that was really neat to hear. But my question is more in terms of advice. With all your experience as a female leader, what advice would you give the next generation of female leaders?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I can't, Andrea, I can't do it in only one piece of advice. But I'll give the top three, right? One is, my mother was this kind of amazing woman who had these sayings that she had no idea were smart, but turned out to be brilliant, right? And when I was growing up, I didn't think they were that smart, but turned out to be brilliant. One of the things that she always would tell me is that if they wanted you to be like everyone else, they would have hired somebody else. And the reason, so what I mean is that female leaders have to be female. They have to be female. I mean, we try a lot to kind of conform, look like, act like, have behaviors like, model ourselves after the emotional, everything of males. The reason why we were hired into the company it's probably because you were pretty good at what you were doing, and you were doing that as a woman, not as anybody else. So don't trade in your hat when you walk in the door and try to be like them. That's one. It's amazing. It's kind of like, sounds like a trite thing, but it is amazing how many people try to do this. We take on the dress, we take on the behaviors, very aggressive, very command and control. That's not necessarily the way that we lead. If it is the way you lead, keep going. If it's not, so number one, don't trade in your stripes at the door to become like the other guys, because they didn't hire the other guys, they hired you. Number two is, there's this idea that we have in our mind, also implanted there by society, that there's this thing called balance, right? And I get it all. We're going to balance our work and family life. It's kind of the oddest conversation in the world. What does that mean? That mean that you spend 8 hours and then 8 hours and then the other 8 hours? No, balance doesn't happen. Anne Mulcahy would tell me all the time, balance was on average over your lifetime. So you'll have huge amounts of months where you're not balanced, where you're spending too much time on work, too much. So my point in this thing about balance is take some of the pressure off of yourself. Literally participate in a joyful, complete, confident way into the whatever you're engaged in, your work, and do it with joy and not do it with this kind of thing on your shoulder, always looking for, always kind of like planning it, becoming very unhappy, unpleasant. A second. The third is speak up. What has happened is that we are all victims of our past, of history. And in order to change the present, we have to actually note what happened in history, and then talk about what we want to see different in the future. We have to actually engage. We can't just, I was in with a young executive who works for me in a SPAC that I just formed, really amazing woman. And she said to me, Ursula, they don't listen to me. The men don't listen to me. They'll, a guy, I'll say something and then somebody else will say something and they'll all listen to him. And I said, well, what did you do? She said, well, nothing. I said, well, speak up. Stop the room and say, by the way, just for your information, just to make sure you understand, I said the same thing and you guys weren't listening. I listened to you, you should listen to me. So actively engage to change the present so that the future is better for our children. Have fun, enjoy it. And I say, be women. We can't try to be men. Be women.
That's good advice.
Next question from Rebecca Almanza at University of Dallas. Rebecca, if you go ahead and unmute, you can ask your question.
University of Dallas. Oh my goodness.
Yes. Hi, Ursula. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you, the Federal Reserve for putting this on today. So my question is kind of in relation to working professional as a woman and you know, trying to move up in your career and the balance of or lack of balance with family life. And you mentioned you're married, and I just want to maybe ask you some tips that you might have for working professionals, and that can be women, that can be men. How do you make time for your family in leading such an important role? And I'm sure that your work family is a part of that too. So if you have any tips and advice in keeping that relationship in good standing.
Yeah, I would, this is a question I'm asked just about every place I go by men and women of all ages. And one of the things I say a lot, and I want you to remember, hopefully you have this asset, it's a partnership. So, you know, when I was being raised, when my mother was only my mother, there was nobody she could call on except for herself. Generally, when I was, well, not generally, but when I was making my way in my career, I had a husband who literally, we had an active conversation about duties. I mean, we didn't say it like, let's have a conversation about duties, but obviously we had 2 kids. We had to figure out what the heck was going to go on. And we figured out a way for us to both kind of contribute to that so that not only one of them had the total burden. I am amazed at how many women, educated women, literally I go to Harvard, Yale, MIT, I do it all the time. And the women ask me this question all the time. And I say to them, you're probably marrying somebody from this class, right? From, you met your husband at Harvard or MIT, and you're having a conversation with me. It would seem to me to be really important that you have that conversation with your mate, right? Because there is no presumption that you're going to be the one who carries all the weight or not. So first is there's a partnership here. It's not only you, it's the 2 of you, and hopefully you guys can figure out a solution going forward. I ended up having the benefit of marrying somebody who was 20 years older than I was. And so right when I started to go crazy in my career, he stayed home. He literally retired. He had been at work for 45 years. So turned out not everybody has that benefit. You're gonna have to figure out a partnership that works there. That's one. The second is that generally we talk about the choice between 2 things, right? Our work and our family. And I did this for many years, and know that you will not be able to have that conversation and solve the problem if you don't put the 3rd very important factor in there, and that's yourself. So if you don't put at the center of this whole thing what you want and what you need, forget everybody else, what you want and what you need. And then this is not the way you proceed, but you have to look at it at least for a little while from that perspective, and then build a solution around that. You're going to find out that you're going to be unhappy. You're going to be burned out and unhappy. So find out the things that make you happy, what's important to you. You may have to trade some of those things off to balance out. But most people in this situation, and most unfortunately of them are women, literally never consider this as an option that they should be considering. Literally, nope, we got the family, we got the work, and you know, let's figure it out. And they do all of this stuff. And then they look back and say, that was, the family seems okay, the work seemed to be okay. I'm like totally and completely unhappy, drained, etc. So put at the center of your negotiations with yourself, put yourself there. Because if you will be surprised at what happens if you take that perspective first. Forget everybody else. What is it that I want? It's hard to do, but it's something to do. And then we have structures in society, I was talking about this with Rob before we got on air, that were designed not with women in mind. They were designed with men in mind. We have daycare systems that are fundamentally broken. We have school years that are structured around a different family life than we all live right now, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to take a while to get some of these things changed. But one of the things that you have to do as an intelligent, I call it a graced individual, you know, probably have more money than the average person has, more education than the average person has to try to help us switch society from where it is today to where it should be. No, somebody else is not going to do this. There is nobody else. It's us that has to say, yeah, I'm going to work with the schools. I'm going to work with policymakers. We have to get more engaged in designing the future versus just living in it today and saying, oh my God, it's really hard. So those three things, Rebecca.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, Rebecca. And just a reminder, if anybody else wants to ask a question, just click on the raise hand icon on the Zoom control bar or on the Q&A icon, and you can submit a written question. Next up is Robert Potter. Robert, if you go ahead and unmute, you can ask your question. Robert?
You're muted, Robert.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you're good.
Ms. Burns, thanks for your comments about the activist attack of Exxon. Would you give us your perspective of the activist investor attack on Xerox?
Yeah, I think that, by the way, a good question. I think that there is a role in the world for shareholders to voice their opinion. And one of the ways they do that is through activism. I'm not a big fan, primarily because it generally is too specific and knowledgeable about how and what's happening inside of the company. And I think that was one of the effects or the what happened at Xerox. There's clearly a need. So Xerox is a company, was a company, it's still a company, but was a company back then that was founded to make copies, to reproduce pieces of paper. That business literally is not as it was not valuable anymore. By the way, it's a good business. It's kind of interesting, and you can make a little bit of money, generate a lot of cash, but it's not that interesting to investors. And so what you do when you have a company, you don't have a need to exist every day. You don't have a right to be there just because you were there before. If you don't need to be there anymore, then you close down, right? I mean, I don't know what companies would be that, but you don't need to be there anymore. Xerox was trying to do what most companies do when they're going through a massive change, which is to bring along all of the constituents that are valuable in the journey of change. Activists generally, and definitely the one that I was dealing with, didn't care about two of those constituencies. I cared about all of them. Our board did as well. There's a shareholder, there is a community, and there are a whole set of employees. And one of the things that is really interesting is that when you look at one of the most amazing effects that happens when an activist comes in, when you can cut costs, your share price goes way up. If you ever announce you're going to fire a whole bunch of people, it's like the savior type of thing. Unfortunately for me, I actually thought a little bit more broadly about it than that. I wanted to make sure that I did not gut Rochester, New York. I mean, this is a community that doesn't have a whole lot. Up there, it had a whole bunch of companies, didn't have a lot. And we could have literally run this operation cheaper. I'm assure you, if we would have outsourced every damn thing to Mexico or someplace else. But that didn't seem like the problem set I was trying to solve. What I was trying to solve, what the board was trying to solve, what we were trying to solve was a problem set that was profitable company with a future that included the neighbors, the homeowners, the schools, the whatever. So I only say this example because oftentimes we look at activists and we think about the one thing that's clearly measurable in the short term. And that's what the share price is tomorrow. And that is, I say this to shareholders all the time, be careful. We will get exactly what we asked for. We're going to get exactly what we asked for. We're going to get the most profitable companies in the world that have very little community connection, have very little focus on the fact that we need to employ people in our country, and in other countries as well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I haven't quite figured this out. I haven't quite figured out how to do this, but this is one of the things I spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about, which is, so what is the role of a company in the United States nowadays, in the world? Before it was pretty straightforward. TSR, The measure was that if you had high TSR, you were successful. If you had low TSR, you were not. Total shareholder return, share price. Now it's a lot harder. What we want is we want diverse, equitable, and inclusive companies. We want sustainable companies. We want companies that actually have a point of view about social issues. So now this is more fun. It's actually significantly harder than the math equation at the bottom. So Robert, I'm sorry, but a long answer. I think that activism is useful, but it has to be tempered from the rest of the shareholder perspective on exactly what do you want this company to do. You can't ask for it both ways, right? You can't have it both ways.
So Ursula, let me follow up on that. Just and we've talked over the years a lot about this. I think a lot of these things even out over a not long enough time. In other words, if you care about all your constituencies in the long run, I think most things I've seen says that you're going to have a better company if you worry about externalities. But the way shareholders are set up, you get the same vote whether you own the stock for a week or if you owned it for 5 years. And some people have proposed some adjustments, if not to the tax treatment, then to the voting. So it incentivizes or gives more weight to those that are long-term holders. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but it's an interesting proposal saying that ultimately would be in the best interest of the country. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that on the surface and even 2 or 3 levels below the surface, this is probably one of the most logical conclusions I've ever heard of. I've heard it before, obviously, and it's been negotiated or debated often. Absolutely. Short-term activism, I mean, it's like a dice game, right? I mean, you just throw them here, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, go on to the next one. That's not what companies are about. That's not how they should be run. And so I do agree that having some control around how much voting power you have based on how long you've been invested is something that's definitely sensible. That won't do it all though, Rob. I think that, I remember when I was early in my career, this was way before I was an executive at Xerox, I was running planning on a program, and it was about making a output device, a continuous form feeder on a copier. You don't have to understand this, but I remember saying that we can make this thing better because it's kind of a clunky device, and you have to move it in and out, and it would always break. I said we should make it better if we put this thing with, instead of the plastic thing, we could put a metal thing. And the guy who I worked for said to me, Ursula, I want you to go to Walmart. And he said, look at the t-shirts in Walmart. And one of the t-shirts costs $1.99 and it'll last you for 6 months. The other t-shirt costs $5.99 and it'll last you for a year. Walmart will sell out, not only because of affordability or the math of it, they'll sell out on the $1.99, and the guy who makes the $5.99 will go out of business. And the reason why I bring this up, it's not obviously not totally linear alignment, is that we have to actually educate ourselves as consumers and citizens in the world as well. We have to be prepared to understand that our standard of living in this country cannot support itself. We cannot continue by saying, well, I won't buy that shirt because it's $1.99. Because it's $5.99, we couldn't afford to keep the lights on, the roads clean, the policemen in bay, the Federal Reserve working, the X and the Y and Z, the things that we love, if we're not willing to make an informed decision about how much we're willing to invest in the future of this country and in the future of the world. So the reason why I bring it up is that Xerox goes around and we try to figure out a way to make the most sturdy thing in the world, right? Somebody from whoever, it's not only Xerox, any company, whoever kind of brings one in, it costs 1/10 the price. Before we can figure out a way to respond, we're out of business. I don't want mercy. I'm not a person who wants business mercy. I want informed decision-making. Right? I want people who own shares. I want people who shop. I want people who live in this country to say, I get it. I've traveled everywhere. I've been everywhere in the world. There's not a place, North Pole, I haven't been at the North and the South Pole. Every place, you name it. And there is not a country that I would prefer to live in than this one. even though I live in the UK most of the time now because of a failed presidency that I couldn't live with. But the reason why is it works. It generally works. And this is not, it works because a lot of people before us designed it. We used to work together to make it work better. And now it's gotten so crazy. We're literally, it's almost like we're in the middle of the road where we're scrumming for a piece of bread. We're not that country. Yeah. We have a lot more to offer, and we have to figure out a way to work better together such that I pay a living wage to people. Literally, you can't work full-time in this country and be poor. That is not allowed. I know we're far from it, but that should be a goal of ours. Let's figure out how to win. These are the kind of things that I kind of went off subject, but this is the kind of thing that keeps me going. I know I've been everywhere. I've been to, you name it, Cuba, Poland, all over the place, Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan. There's not a place I would prefer to live than here. And we are at the point where we can make it incrementally better by a lot.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, where we can make it incrementally worse by a lot. And when I spoke to the Dallas, no, not to the Dallas, you to Dallas, to the Minneapolis Fed, I said this. So I'm gonna go because that you guys have to be more active in this conversation with us.
Yeah.
Because we don't, I mean, most people don't have a clue what the Fed does.
Right.
But they think whatever it is that they have a clue, they think it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Right? Then I'm talking to the Fed, I'm like, oh my God, this is like a Fed president, the Fed chairman, this is amazing. They know it's a big deal. They know it has something to do with money.
Yeah.
But that's where it ends, right? And I think that part of the thing that I say to the Fed employees, the Fed structure, is that just like people don't know what you do, you don't know what people do. You have to, and I mean regular guys, not the 1%, the regular guys. And I think that if we can kind of, I don't want you to spend all your time walking up and down the streets and figure out.
Actually, we do, and I do, we do, and we have a big outreach, but I think it's good advice. It's good advice. We need to communicate what we do, and we need to make sure we're listening and close to the ground and understanding our communities. And we agree with you.
Yeah, it's not above them. It's not above. It is hard, but it's not. Most people.
No, we think it's critical to our job. And by the way, I'm digressing, but diversifying our boards has allowed us to. We have a lot of ways to get close, to be out there physically, but our boards through our district, we've got the right representation. Also helps us understand better. And so we agree we got to do better. We're doing better, and we got to keep doing better. We agree.
Well, I know the date, some of the data didn't commit it to memory, but it's good. So I actually do.
We're getting there.
Yeah, I do a little bit of a.
We're getting there.
I agree to talk to someone.
All right, Mark Wynn, squeeze in a couple more if you can.
So a question from one of our colleagues on corporate culture. Xerox is known for having the first employee resource group in the country, the National Black Employee Caucus, which I believe you all created in 1970. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of ERGs in company culture, corporate culture?
Absolutely, positively critical. Critical. Yeah, Xerox started this with the Black Employees Association. We followed it with the Women's Alliance. We had HAPA, the Hispanic Alliance. We had the Asian Alliance, Gays and Galaxy, Gays and Lesbians. And by the way, this was not about telling the company what to do as much as these caucuses actually helping each other to understand what the company did, to get a coalesced message to the company, so a little bit of feedback, and just learning back and forth. It's hard to be alone.
What year did you establish those, by the way?
I think that the Black Employees Association was started by 3 employees in '68, and Mark was actually right. The first one was in 1970. So thank you for doing the research, whoever did the research. So yeah, and then we started the BWLC, Black Women's Leadership Council, in '89 or so. But still,
so you were early.
We were more than early. We were the trailblazer here.
You were it.
The standard. We did it. And one of the reasons why I say this as you know, I just wrote a book that's coming out soon, but I don't want to spend any time on that. The book that's coming out soon. I say in the book, one of the reasons, when I became CEO, they said, "Oh my God, look at this, Ursula Burns, the first Black woman." And I said that was not the story they should have been focusing on. The story should have been, how did this company do that? How did they have a woman CEO that was replaced by a Black woman CEO? And what was the formula inside of Xerox that let that happen, that allowed that to happen, that had more diversity in the C-suite and in the board than any company at that time? What happened? And part of it was this openness to, we need to hear some other points of view. Let's get some caucus groups in. This openness to Vernon Jordan. We need a person on the board who, we had Joan Gans Cooley, who was on the board as well.
Wow.
Just like we need some people who are totally different, who can tell us
Wow.
some things about what's happening in the world. And that's the point. That was just an amazing thing. The culture maybe not have been as gritty as most companies. This was not Chainsaw Jack culture at all. It was a lot more inclusive, a lot more team-based. Actually, and I wrote an article in New York Times about being too nice sometimes. We were actually a very, we're very nice culture in the company. And that's good, by the way, you do need it, but sometimes it goes overboard. So we had a company that was kind of set up way before even I joined, way before the Black caucus groups joined, by the founder, who literally saw race riots outside in Rochester. As you know, one of the most affected parts during the 60s race riots was in that small town, Rochester, New York, where the whole downtown was burned, people were killed, etc. And he watched this and said, "There's something wrong here." I mean, how about all those guys who I see kind of marching out in the street, burning things? Why aren't they working for me? Why aren't some of them working for me? So he started a whole process in the culture. Huh. By the time I got there, Joe Wilson, he was amazing. By the time I got there, he's long dead. The company had already had a culture of difference, inclusion, not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but one that said, yeah, we're more concerned about your mind than about how you look. Yeah, of course, there are people who are concerned about how you look, but we're more concerned about your mind. And that's one of the reasons why I was successful.
And it's interesting, they got you early. In other words, they got you before you finished school.
Absolutely. It's still something that we do. I don't know if we do. I've been gone for so long, but that's something that we're very, very, very active in. We had programs, one that was called PRISM. It's the program in Rochester, interest students in science and math. It starts in grade school, called PRISM, because we needed scientists and engineers. And we realized early, just like where all companies are realizing today, that you can't say, oh, it's now senior year in college, we need to recruit some engineers. It takes a lot longer than like 5 minutes to make them. So we say, okay, it's fine. You got to go back to the high schools. Oh my God, there's not enough in the high schools. You got to go back to the grade schools. And Xerox has figured that out long ago. We don't have patience for that kind of stuff, though. I mean, our country, generally, we obviously do sometimes, generally wants it, it's a problem today. I'm looking at the watch. Can we get the solution tomorrow?
A lot of companies, we do it here at the Fed, and it's a way we found, if you want to get diversity, you got to start earlier.
You got to start early. You have to do it. And you have to get engaged in things that are not comfortable for companies to actually, or banks to get involved in. You got to get a little engaged in schools, unfortunately. Right. Got to get a little engaged in families and family structures. What's causing this stuff to these kids to fail out? If you're not interested in that, you're not going to be able to fix it. If you're not going to be able to fix it, the problem is going to persist.
So let me ask you a final question. In this Global Perspectives audience, we attract business leaders, community leaders, former mayors, nonprofit leaders are on this. And I think the one thing they have in common, they're interested in making the world a better place. And they want to make a positive contribution in their communities. What advice would you give them as we sit here today? What actions could they take that could help make their community and I guess by extension, this country a better place right now?
Yeah, I think it's general and then very specific. First thing, this world is not a fait accompli. It is not done today. We are making it. We are doing it. We're deciding paths as we go forward. People say, oh my God, look get engaged. Anything. If you are, it could be as simple as there's a school in your neighborhood that needs some mentors for kids. It could be There's a need for a liaison between point A and point B policing. It could be whatever it is, but get engaged. Sitting back, watching television, sitting back and complaining about things literally gets nothing done. Nothing done. What happens then is you, as I say to my kids, you don't get engaged, don't complain. So please, I say to everybody out there, even people who don't necessarily agree with me, if you're right-minded and right-hearted, activate yourself. We are not a passive nation. We have to be engaged to get to the better outcome. That's one. Number two, please, please, please understand that there are a large number of people out there that have nothing, near nothing or nothing. We are I think, at an unbelievable point right now in the world, in the United States, particularly when it comes to women and girls. I'm on the G7's GAC. I've been selected as a commissioner for the G7 on Gender Equality Action Commission. The position of women and girls is horrifying, and it has stepped back 20 years since COVID, including in the United States. So in addition to getting engaged, we have to pay some very close attention to very specific subsegments of our society. We cannot make it without having a strong female base in this country. It just doesn't work. I mean, there is nothing about it that is not possible. And we are losing it with women and girls' education, safety, burden of work. We're just losing it. So the second is find something big, very local, but then find something big that you can at least advocate for. I don't care what the heck it is. And then the third, I say to everyone, you have your own kids and family. My mother used to always say her biggest gift is going to be good kids to the world. Please take care of the people close to home. Make sure that they have good values and that you're kind of unforgiving on what your expectations are in that sense. So those three things. I am unbelievably optimistic a lot of the time. And since November, I have become even more optimistic. And I think we have a shot at, we've had some tough times. This has been a tough year and a half economically, but also just in mood. It's been a tough mood, and it's us. There's not like those guys are us. There's no those guys. I'm always looking around for the guys who are going to save us. It's us. We can't sit around and watch TV, be inactive, complain, stay in a little cocoon. We have to actually engage. And I think if we engage, it'll be a better place.
Ursula Burns, thank you for being here with us tonight. Thank you for your leadership. Great advice, great words of wisdom. Could talk for a lot longer. And we appreciate all that you do. But thank you again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaplan. Thank you, Mark. I love your head, Mark.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us this evening. Apologies if you submitted a question that we did not get to. You'll soon receive a survey asking for your feedback on this event, and we'd very much welcome your candid responses. We will be resuming our Global Perspectives events in the fall, starting with DFW Airport CEO Sean Donoghue in August, followed by former US Treasury Secretary Larry Summers in October, and former Reserve Bank of India Governor Raghuram Rajan in November. Details on how to register for all of these events can be found at dallasfed.org, or can be shortly. And with that, we are adjourned. Have a good evening.